right now on Higher Journeys Radio with Alexis Brooks. There are many today who yearn to walk a spiritual path, and others who insist they are already on their way. But in that journey, where does pain and trauma come into play? According to Neil Kramer, without addressing the trauma, there can be no true spiritual work. We had Neil back on for part 2 of a completely riveting and soul-stirring discussion about mapping the shadow, growing into a fully conscious human, and understanding the painstaking work that comes before any meaningful benefit can honestly be realized. You know, Neil, it's rare that I ask a guest to come back for 2 consecutive appearances. In fact, I think I've only done that once before. But based on all that you had to share with our audience in the last show, in which we simply touched on some very powerful concepts, I thought it would behoove us all to get you right back on as soon as practical. And I'm happy to say you graciously accepted. So welcome back, Neil.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you again.
Yes, absolutely. On this going into the weekend, a great way to end the week. So we're going to be off and running. So look, let's pick this conversation right back up. Let's get right into it by having a chat about what you call shadow mapping. And I'd like to cover the art of mapping the shadow, not only from a micro perspective, but from the macro as well. So I'd love to look at the personal shadow as well as the global, and how we can use that very critical process as an integral step to becoming a fully conscious human on this planet. We touched on our last show, the idea of polarity. And I wanted to use that. I thought that would be good to use as a segue to get into our discussion about the shadow. But first, let's get into what I'm calling the destructive versus constructive use of polarity, maybe contrasting Empire's destructive use of polarization. And then we can look at a more alchemical understanding using solar and lunar aspects as an analogy. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. But here's where I think we should go. I don't know how many people in our audience have heard the term shadow mapping. And, I was looking up the shadow mapping. I Googled it. And interestingly, what comes up as a definition in mainstream is sort of a graphics process of 3D overlay of some sort. So that's interesting. You have a very different definition, however. Maybe you'd share a little bit of a thumbnail with us about what that is all about.
Sure. Well, let me just go back to one thing you said a moment ago, first of all. You said, understanding these things helps us on this sort of path to become, as you described it, a fully conscious human. Shadow mapping is part of that process. That, in my sincere opinion, the process of becoming fully conscious is about a 70-year process from the time of initial stirring, from the time of initial spiritual arousal. So it isn't something that happens overnight. It's something that takes a very long time. It's a little bit like in Shotokan karate, which I used to do. There's a thing called a red belt, Judan, which is the highest belt you can get, higher than a black belt. And to have the ultimate red belt, you would be somewhere between 70 and 80 years of age, minimum, because of the prior work that needs to take place for that to happen. So if you equate fully conscious human with red belt, you're on the right track. So it is a very deep process, and I just want to emphasize that because I'm aware that many people who come to spiritual work think that once you've started the process, that's it. You're on a spiritual path. No, you're not. No, you're not. To be on a spiritual path is a very, very sincere and devoted piece of work that I've only seen maybe 100 people achieve that in my life out of tens of thousands that I've met. So I must say, just out of diligence and disclosure, that I have a very harsh view of what it is to be a fully conscious human. Harsh in the sense that the quality bar is very high. That's all. So I just want to explain that before we go on, so you can set it in a certain perspective.
Thank you.
Then.
Yeah, thank you.
Shadow mapping is the appreciation that truth brings pain. Truth brings pain. Most people are not prepared to live truthfully because they are ill-equipped to deal with the disturbance that it brings. Initially, the more truth one encompasses and embodies in life, the more suffering will arise. Now, that's a temporary state of affairs, and it's almost like an initiation, a test. It's like a survival course, an assault course. It's like an examination. And it's so tricky and so difficult that as most people face that first hurdle, they approach it and just turn back and think, you know what? I don't want to go through pain. I don't want to bring back the old pain of my traumas from whenever in life, broken hearts, suffering, separation, abuse, maybe violence, all the different things, whether one's had a very physically traumatic time or whether it's been a very quiet, desolate, silent trauma emotionally. In the end, perhaps it makes rather little difference. Trauma is trauma. And when that pain of truthfulness comes, it resonates that trauma. It sets it jangling again, the old pain, we call it in my work. And people are so afraid of that instead of living with truth, they would rather live with a fiction. And the fiction is that spiritual work is peaceful, soft, and gentle, and nice. And my experience of it is almost exactly the opposite. Spiritual work is hard, severe, brutal, punishing work. And if that isn't happening, you're not doing it properly. Now that, as I say, is a temporary state of affairs. And it's like a lady said to me the other day, she said it's a bit like a video game in that the higher you get in the game, the higher the level you're playing at, the more challenging it gets.
Right.
So it's not like when you get good at spirituality, life gets easier. It doesn't. It gets more involved. It gets more challenging. Now that challenge is what spirituality requires, a particular attitude for it. So the great business, and we'll come to this shadow mapping in a moment, the great business of the spiritual human is to change their approach to challenges. Now in mainstream life, when a person faces a challenge, they will invariably define it as misfortune, a problem, an accident, a difficulty. In my Hermetic instruction as a younger man from, say, 25 to 35, what I was taught to appreciate was that you should frame difficulty as initiation, not misfortune.
I understand.
Difficulty is soul wisdom set before you on purpose. There is no such thing as misfortune. There's no such thing as randomness, as chaos, as chance. Chaos is just, really a level of complexity of order that we can't appreciate. That's all it is. So when somebody understands those things, you think, okay, so the approach is what matters. It's my approach to a challenge, my approach to the initiation. And it's like a student, let's say a music student who relishes the challenge of taking on a difficult piece of music with a lot of, let's say it's a guitar player with a lot of very difficult scales and fretting and a lot of difficult speed or complexity. And instead of thinking, oh my gosh, that's too difficult and my fingers are hurting, I want to go home, they think, you know what, I'm going to master this. Not to look good, not to show off, not to be all grandiose, but rather simply just for my own satisfaction of meeting the challenge and getting somewhere where I can consider myself in a position of accomplishment purely for my own betterment and fulfillment.
Right.
Don't care how that looks on the outside.
Yeah, yeah. May I interject? Because again,
Please.
I feel like I'm going down, having a deja vu here, wanting to take written copious notes, and I'm going to have to try to retain as much as I can, because you have said so much, Neil, that I'm sure much of our audience will be able to relate to. I mean, what you're really talking about is in the right, how can I say, with the right mindset, one would acknowledge that this is really a primal aspect of being human, that it particularly, well, when you have trauma, you don't enjoy that, obviously, but if you can transmute the chaos into a challenge that can be useful, I can relate to that, actually. You're giving several broad examples, you know, the person that's, I think you mentioned playing the piano, in a difficult piece, and rising to the occasion, which at some level you just know you have to do. On the other hand, you take what we call misfortune, and I'm immediately thinking of my own, what I never called misfortune. I think you and I shared this several years ago when my husband were going through a complete time of tumult, but we knew on some very instinctive level, we called it a litmus test, but we decided to transmute it into raising the bar for us and knowing that this was some sort of an initiation. Honestly,
right. Good attitude.
Absolutely. I think that's the only way we got through. But so I just wanted to make that comment, and of course have you go on, because I think this is so important. You've already made some very, very strong points about not people thinking that they may be on a spiritual path based on what they've told that entails, and in fact finding out not. But let's move forward. I don't want to do too much talking here.
Sure, no problem. No, thank you for adding that dimension to it. It's always important that we can interweave these things. Trauma, if you think about it, that word is thrown around rather a lot. Trauma is really distress from shock. That's what trauma is. Mm-hmm. It's a great disharmony that is fired through one's bones and blood, as you might say, when you are shocked by something. It might be a fist. It might be a picture on a television set. It might be a loud shouting parent in a room. It could be a number of things. And like I say, the physicality of that trauma is somewhat different, of course, in everyone's set of experiences. And sometimes it's a very, very in your face, abuse, sexual, physical abuse, things like that, which we can all say is going to damage a person, is going to traumatize them. And then just the neglect, the passive aggression, the silent aggression, the gaslighting, the insanity making that many people go through at home and school and in bad marriages and bad relationships. All of those things traumatize people. And this is the bottom line as we approach our consideration of shadow mapping. If trauma is not fully processed, it rules the person. It dictates everything they do, who they marry, what they wear, the music they listen to, the books they read, the TV shows they watch. Everything they do is a strategy to divert themselves from trauma. Because any new trauma is old trauma also, you see. So what the mystical human has to do, the spiritual human, mystic just meaning initiate into the mystery of life, and let's just plainly say that we initiate ourselves into that mystery for the time being. What the initiate appreciates is that the first test is to overcome trauma. Not to just avoid it, but to overcome it, to go into the very, very heart of it. So shadow mapping is the principal, primary piece of work for real spiritual life, real spiritual men and women whose heart and mind are serious, substantially focused on this work. And that means why do bad things happen to good people? Let's just put it plainly like that. Mm-hmm. Why do bad things happen to good people? if there's a higher force, if there's a God, if there's a spiritual source, why does this stuff happen? Why does that come about? And so as soon as you do that, you take your first step into dissolving trauma by depersonalizing it, thinking, okay, it's not just me who's been traumatized, it's everybody. Mm-hmm. So if you ever look around the streets of America and France and Europe and Britain and God knows where, everywhere all around the world, if you ever look around those streets and think, why is everybody so brain dead and stupid and defeated and resigned and unconscious? Why is that? Because people are, generally speaking, good at heart when you get close to them. Mm-hmm. There's very few awful human beings, but there's a lot of unconscious human beings. Why is that? And I would say that as you examine that question, you come to empire. Yeah. Empire says, don't go into trauma, avoid it. And we will give you a culture and an education system and a workplace and a family set of protocols and churches that will do absolutely nothing to address your trauma. But what they will do is deliver you a fiction, a total piece of fiction in which you can involve yourself and just forget the trauma. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, on one hand you get mainstream, silly, decadent culture that we see in America and Europe today, and on the other hand you get terrible, terrible Abrahamic, Judaic, Islamic, Christian churches who don't know anything about anything and just mislead people. Not all of them, but many of them. And then you get the materialists who say everything is random. We're just monkeys who've evolved to a stage of relative sentience, and everything's a piece of massive cold clockwork, totally dead, totally accidental, and we just climbed out of the swamp, which is a form of religious fundamentalism as far as I'm concerned. That materialism, that scientism, to me is laughable. And I seriously can't imagine that anybody really believes that. It's a diversion. Right. So at every turn you care to look at in life, in mainstream life, whether you're an atheist, a religious person, or whether you're a big cultural person, it doesn't matter. At every turn you are being asked to forget trauma. The spiritual teacher, the man worth his salt, the woman worth her salt in this regard, says, we're going to do the opposite of that. Not only are we going to look at it, we're going to map it. Mm-hmm. We're going to go into it. We're going to relive it. We're going to enact it. We're going to become trauma. We're going to become pain. We're going to become the antagonist. We're going to channel that suffering right all over again, worse than the first time. We're going to dissolve yourself like the phoenix that reduces itself to ashes. Complete destruction. And then when that is remade, then you will be free of that pain.
When you've passed the initiation.
That process takes about 20 years from the moment you first begin it. Sure. So if you started that at 30, you'll be 50. If you started that at 45, you'll be 65. A minimum 20-year process to get to a point of relative dissolution, i.e. it's no longer dictating what you do. It's not gone yet, but it's gone enough that you can get on with your life and do stuff. Total dissolution, as I say, comes at the point of great adeptness, which is more like a 30 to 50-year process. Mm-hmm. So who on earth, in the age of I can't read something for more than 30 seconds, who on earth wants to take on the shadow mapping? Who wants to look at that stuff? Who wants to say, what is pain? Why did difficult things happen to me? Why did I choose those things to come my way? Why is the soul that loves me in conjunction with God presenting me with this constant challenging set of circumstances, 101 problems, and every time one problem is resolved, another one pops up? Why is that? Right. And shadow mapping, the mystery of shadow mapping, begins to reveal why.
I think it would take an extremely erudite person in this day and age, Neil, to even realize that a shadow could be mapped. I think what is going through my mind as we talk about the people, God bless them, really, who are lovely and still unconscious, many of them, don't know that it is something to be mapped and wouldn't even bother asking the question because they are so enfolded, not unfolded, but enfolded in the trauma that Empire, interestingly, has asked them to avoid, but has also created for them much of it.
Yes, it's like any torturer, any mind controller will tell you that the trauma process fragments a person, and it causes them to compartmentalize different components of themselves. And when that fragmentation, when that compartmentalization takes place, each of those separate fragments is very programmable. You can't program a whole person. It can't be done. You can't program a whole woman, a whole man. So programming me is very difficult because I have achieved a relatively decent, not as happy with it yet, of course, it'll be another 30 years work, but a relatively decent level of wholeness by choosing a spiritual life, a truthful life. That's all that is. And it's very difficult to influence me. It's very difficult to steer me or trick me or con me. It happens. I get it wrong like everyone else, but not very often, right? If I were traumatized over and over again, though, once you become fragmented, it's easy to program somebody and say, hey, you want something different? Then Bernie Sanders is your answer. And they go, fantastic, feel the burn, let's go. This is it. This is the way forward. Yeah. And you say, whoa, wait a second. Is that my only menu option? Is there anything else? People who are fragmented it doesn't occur to them that. It doesn't occur that they have to fabricate to create. I use the word fabricate in the old-fashioned sense, which means make, of course, not synthesize synthetically. They have to make their own representation. You can't have somebody like Bernie Sanders do it. That would be a disaster. Of course it would be a disaster when you look carefully. But the fiction doesn't tell you that, does it? The fiction says Bernie Sanders will distribute wealth equally, free healthcare, free education, delivering a utopian society that we all want. That's the fiction. The fiction is why you see bumper stickers on the car. It's people who don't want to shadow map. They want the fiction.
Right. That's right. They want the fiction. I've had people actually say to me in so many words, I don't want to look at the truth. Frankly, it's too painful. They've said it.
That's right.
I know people that have said it. People that I've gotten into certain discussions that took them partially down the rabbit hole.
And when they say it, you have to say, okay,
no problem.
You can't shake them by the shoulders and say, God damn it, I'm going to drill this into you. Usually, sit down, young man, and listen right now. You can't. When somebody says to you, you know what? I just don't want to talk about that stuff. Let's watch the Seattle Seahawks on TV and have another beer. Sure. I mean, it's the last time I'll see you, but sure, let's do that. So you have to respect somebody's request for sanctuary, where they say, look, I'm just not ready for that. I'm not at a developmental stage where I'm prepared, ready, inclined, whatever, to do that. You have to say, fine, that's okay. Mm-hmm. For the people who are ready, who have realized
that's what we're talking to. Yes.
For the people who are ready, my wonderful audience, your wonderful audience, and the new people who perhaps we stimulate through our broadcasts and material today, for those people who are thinking, I am ready. I do want to make myself better and make life better. They start to realize that truth is the pathway for that. And initially, my statement, truth brings pain. Why? Because you have to kill the fiction. Mm-hmm. That's the painful bit. Truth will only deepen you. Truth will only magnetize soul. It will only bring good things into your life. But it will kill the fiction. And if you've been running a fiction, a daydream, an ideal, and even if it's a really good one where if you wrote it down or made a video game of it, I would think, wow, that's absolutely wonderful. But it's a fiction. You can't live that fiction without addressing what is. So the spiritual woman, the spiritual man says, well, we'll work toward a better world, of course, but we have to begin with what is before us, what is in front of our toes and our fingertips, what's in front of our nose right now. Let's examine the nature of that, because if we don't do that, we cannot sanctify the next stepping stone unless we have looked truthfully at what is before us. So it requires spirituality, again, the opposite of what most people think. It requires an extraordinary, super severe practicality, i.e., it's empirical. You do it, you feel it, you sweat it, you bleed it. Mm-hmm. It's right in front of you. It's only what is true, which is why, as we often say in my work, only a humble head can gather wisdom. So a great big ego is no use in this work. Mm. An ego that obscures reality is going to slow things down. So we start to, again, see that truth will only come into a clean vessel, a clear vessel. It doesn't mean you can't have a lovely, colourful personality and be laughing and joking and silly and smart one day and daft the next. That's certainly a description of me. Mm-hmm. And I can be very playful as well as I can be very, somber and very scholarly. I can do all of those things because I'm a full spectrum
human being. Right.
For sure.
I love being human.
I know I do. It's great. And I like to be able to choose what part of the spectrum I'm going to operate in at any one time. Mm. And to go back to our original point, your original question to me, the shadow is half of the spectrum of a human life. It's the negative. It's the minus on your Duracell battery. Mm-hmm. It's the moon above your head. It's the female destroyer. It's everything that powers life. If it wasn't for the negative, the positive that generates life could never work. So there is an alchemical principle at work with shadow mapping, because when you come down to it, you see that there's a force of harmony and a force of disharmony, and the sort of interference pattern that they create, the interleaving of life that they create, is what we are. We are the result of those forces. And so to ignore half of that equation is to simply seek refuge. Mm-hmm. Like I've said so many times, what is the New Age? The New Age is refuge. Yeah. It's the battered women's shelter. It's the battered man's shelter. People go there for peace and refuge and escape. And I understand that. And when I occasionally go to New Age places, I can see them a mile off. I can smell New Age fear a mile off. And it's presented as joy, but it's really the opposite. It's pain, and it's the fear of pain.
Agreed.
And when I see that, I think, you know what? Fine. If you need sanctuary, go for it. If you need to disappear off to the monastery for a quarter century, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what you should do. I don't know. It's none of my business.
Right.
But I know one thing. You're not transforming in that place.
Yeah.
You're just standing still.
Hear, hear. I agree with you, and I too have been in those, and still am on occasion. If it fits, I'll be in if it fits, for conferences and such. I will be in those venues, and particularly the larger ones where you get a good dose of everything. And I often shake my head, thinking, "My gosh, these people are wanting and so desperate to be conscious, and by being so in their desperation are actually doing more harm than good. They're becoming even more unconscious." Exactly. We'll leave it there for now. Before I forget this thought, because we could go off on a tangent.
You're too kind to people, you are. Be mean. You should be meaner. Be meaner with people. Say no, be mean.
Oh, you're such a hater, Neil. Stop it now.
I am. I love to hate.
And if
you must know that about me.
For those of us that heard this great show that we did a couple of weeks ago, he talked about how much of a hater he is. But
I am a major hater.
Oh, my
Massive hate speech from me every second.
He's actually a good guy. You really are. Now, listen, before we start getting silly here, let's because we do have to laugh. We have to laugh. We have to be light. We have to have that balance, as you just made so eloquently made that point. I want to talk about, are you there, by the way?
I am.
Okay, I thought I heard an oops in the background there. I want to bring up something, speaking of the positive and the negative. Now we're talking about mapping polarity as also a part of the whole mapping process, including the shadow. And, Neil, this is a concept that I hope I can articulate properly, because I was thinking about this yesterday, a concept that I have been playing with, which sort of gets us into the alchemical aspects of things. When speaking of the solar and the lunar, solar being masculine, lunar being feminine, this idea of these seeming opposites and how, let's see if I can put this right, when an eclipse takes place based on an alignment of these two celestial bodies, let's say, when this occurs, how does this obscuring of light that happens during an eclipse relate, if at all, to the bigger picture of blending and blurring of opposites? Is there some alchemical significance that we can derive from that, the marriage of solar and lunar? Do you know what I mean?
There is a huge, important significance to an eclipse, which is very potent image in much of Western esoteric philosophy and spiritual traditions, and indigenous French and German and Spanish and Portuguese and English indigenous shamanic traditions. When the time of the eclipse comes, for a moment, and it literally is just for moments, isn't it? I remember we had one here recently, and I watched it with the appropriate technology to have a look at it, which is very safe to look at an eclipse. Don't believe that garbage they tell you.
Yeah.
When you look at an eclipse, what you're seeing is that the thing that generates life and the thing that destroys life, for a moment, are doing neither.
Wow.
And as that happens, there is a pause in the world. There is a pause in the life system. There is a pause in the process of evolution, just for a moment, where you can just stop and look and reflect. And at that moment, there's an enhanced capacity to appreciate one's own place in creation, which is a very broad thing to say, but hopefully I'll explain what I mean by that as we go on. The sun is essentially, we'll speak of its esoteric nature, forget its physical nature for a moment. Esoterically speaking, the sun is the father, is the creator, and is the light of the world. And everything that occurs in this world is generated by that sun. And I would say, if you were teaching this to a class of teenagers and they're saying, what are you talking about? What does that mean? I say, imagine the sun is a movie projector, and what it projects is reality. Physically, atomically, at a molecular level, everything is generated by the sun. And once it's created, it has a certain amount of free will and a certain amount of independence in its own right. And it can go about its business. Like a tree will grow, a mountain will have its magnificent, stately presence there for eons. A river will flow, a man will walk around, a woman will raise her arms and sing to the sky, and the birds will fly, the fish will swim, and everything has its order, its nature, its place in creation. But the higher beings, of which the human is at the top of the tree at the moment, physically in the 3D, they get a chance to do something else, which is to continue to transform themselves and transcend, and that's a word I often say is misused, transcend their origin. And to do that, you have to bring in the destructive power of the moon, the female destroyer, the moon, because you can give your unneeded elements to the moon to destroy it. I have known women who have had cancerous tumors in their bodies who gave those tumors to the moon, and the moon took it and made them disappear because they knew how to do that thing. So they said, I see why I got the tumor. I understand now how this came about. I take the wisdom and I shall never forget it. And now I give this matter, I give this creation to you. And the moon takes it, and then they are cleansed of this blight, of this affliction, of course, which is a scary thing for anybody to encounter such a thing. But it's a very physical example, which is why I choose to use it. You can think of the destroyer, if you want to give it a different kind of mantle, a different kind of title. Think of it as a recycler.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So think of it as a giant furnace that you put everything into
Right.
that has served its purpose. And when it goes into that furnace, it doesn't disappear. You can't destroy anything, really, can you?
Right.
But you can change it. So what goes into the furnace, the giant furnace of that silver moon, gets recycled back to the sun for new creation.
That's transmutation.
That's transmutation.
That's right.
So it's the ultimate, eco-friendly system of all time. Nothing can really be wasted or squandered or plagued by misuse. The problem is that when you don't have transformation, you become static, then you tend to a kind of spiritual corrosion. And it's that process that alchemically becomes a problem, and the body will tend then towards its own demise, its own destruction or whatever. So the alchemist becomes a person who simply is aware that there's this process of creation and destruction, this process of making and unmaking, let's just say it like that, all the time is happening. Now, if you look at that physically and scientifically, it's hard to see. If you think, well, the sun is this giant nuclear fireball thing 93 million miles away in the vacuum of space, and the moon is a little tiny rock that orbits around the Earth. What are you talking about, Neil Kramer, you crazy English bastard? I don't understand. I don't think they are what we're told they are at all. I just don't have any embodied experience of any of those things at all. So I choose to run my own esoteric mythology right today, and it's not been questioned up to now. Now, if Elon Musk stops by this afternoon, as he often does to my house, and says, okay, Neil, let's go for a ride in one of my SpaceX, secret military DARPA rockets, and I'll take you near the sun, and we'll put our super force field up, and I'll take you and show you so you can stop talking that nonsense. Then I might come back and tell you something different next time and say, gosh,
that'll be part 3. That will be part 3. Yes,
Neil's journey to the center of the sun.
That's right.
There is a physical aspect to that body, and I've seen it, and I've felt it, I've experienced it. It moved through me. I moved through it, and there we are. There is something to see. I've not had that experience, and nobody has. And I firmly believe, and this is again where we veer off into dangerous territory, so we won't go too far there because we've got better things to talk about. But what is off-world, quote, is so dramatically different to what you think it is. And I'm not on about flat earth stuff, so anyone getting excited about that, stop it. I'm saying that as soon as you go off-world, it's a dimensional shift. It's not a spatial shift.
Right.
And so moon and sun, when you look at them from a completely energetic point of view, there's no relationship to that, to the standard astronomy model. There isn't. So we'll say forget that. You can try and reconcile those things. But let's just look at the principle of it. The sun creates, the moon destroys. The sun is male, the moon is female. You have to have that very clear gender understanding, that sex understanding. There's only 2 sexes. There can be many gender expressions. You can dress up and do this and have your bits chopped off and stick new bits on if you want to. But there's only 2 sexes.
That's right.
Male and female. There's
in the 3D at least.
Change that.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do to change that. And it's very important. If you'll never meet a gender neutral alchemist, because that would spell death. You'll never meet a transgender alchemist, because that would spell reverse wisdom. It doesn't work. So once you understand the beauty of male and the beauty of female, you can certainly appreciate the more esoteric origins of those forces, in that once the sun and the moon were one thing. Once a man and a woman were one thing. And they will become that again, the sun and the moon and the man and the woman. It's a temporary journey of stark polarity, stark opposites. And to not appreciate the form that you were gifted by the loving God of being a man, of being a woman, is to refute the wisdom of that alchemical manifestation. It's to forfeit your gift of life. So you can definitely explore it, and if you want to explore those expressions in oneself, of course you can do. But the form you were given was given for really good reason. And I think with proper instruction, people would have no problem with that. So for some more focused esotericists and more focused mystics that I know who are doing real work, really serious work, they're troubled by the LGBT movement, not because of its apparent outside presentation of, freedom to choose to express yourself how you wish, but because of its imperial origin, which is to obscure the power of the masculine, the power of the feminine in alchemical terms, which has never happened before, as far as we know, on a cultural scale. So what bothers me about LGBT, which is why I think it's total garbage, is because Empire has no interest in helping human beings express themselves however they wish. That's the last thing they want. What they want you to do is to be confused about what you are. And that's what that movement does when you look at the shadow side of it. The happy side of it, it might mean that if two amazing women want to live together and get married and raise a child, maybe they can. If two amazing guys want to get married and be there for each other and be a proper family and stuff, sure, that's great, I suppose. If you like that kind of thing, well done, go for it. But Empire doesn't want that.
Right.
Empire wants every child in elementary school having no clue of the creative power of the masculine and the destructive power of the feminine. It's not been there since the 1920s, since before the 1910s. It's definitely not there now. And so the process of removing sacred knowledge from school is complete now. So if you have children and you want to teach them what is true about those things and what traditionally those things mean, you can't do it. You can't do it in a mainstream school. You have to find another school who gives the deeper picture of that.
That's right. Or homeschool, of course. It's got to absolutely.
Or homeschool if you're part of a cooperative.
Which I love. I love the concept.
There are men
of
and
that.
women who have that knowledge.
Yeah.
Because you can't get it off the internet.
No. Well, to heck with the internet. I think it's a high time we get back to getting in the libraries. The
Paper,
the tangible
it's the way
ones.
forward.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm just remarking over how you have been traversing the micro and the macro. I think I brought that up at the top of the show, and I think it just kind of went there naturally in terms of not only mapping the shadow, but how each reflects the other. Whether you're looking at the exoteric or the esoteric significance, they are literally mirrors or different aspects of the same thing. So brilliant the way you're doing that. Fantastic. Wow. There's a lot to take in there. I'm glad I brought up the eclipse thing. I looked, Neil, I think I was listening to some of your material and something made me think, well, you had mentioned the role that the solar and lunar from an esoteric standpoint, what they represent, and the importance of mapping polarity and understanding that at the center of it all, it's really all in the same. It's one in the same. And something I saw an image of a full solar eclipse in my mind. It was really that image that I got of this ring, really like a ring of fire, but I saw a circle, which there is no beginning and no end. And I just started playing with that. And I said, there's something esoteric as it may be, there's something very significant that we are meant to understand if we so choose in the bringing together of two seeming opposites. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of saying it. An eclipse is a moment of wholeness. It's a moment of reunion. It totally is. There's no destruction and no creation just for a minute. There's complete, total equilibrium. Right.
And yet, by the other thing that occurred to me is that by the obscuring of light, the blocking of light through an eclipse, you're left with what? The shadow, if you were to look at it that way. There for you to map, if you so choose. Another gift.
Yeah. The eclipse gives you that opportunity to say, darkness is not bad.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I love nature. Everybody knows I'm a big gardener, anxious to get back out there and get going with it. And so I use that as an opportunity, Neil, to make nature more than a metaphor. It's always been more than a metaphor for me, the natural world, and observing that and relating
Nature,
that back to our own
nature is
lives.
a nature is a wise teacher, and
Absolutely.
it's constantly showing you everything, and
Yeah.
it's constantly inviting you to a
Abs-
very deep wisdom. But it's hard to translate without tuition. Most people cannot understand what on earth is a tree showing me, what is the sun showing me, what does the mountain show me. They show you everything,
Everything. I absolutely agree with you. I
but
consult with,
it's a language that you have to learn, and
cultivate.
that takes 100 years. And as we get through that 100 years, we learn more and more and more of it. And we have this phrase in my work: initiates always come back, because of the great, bounty, the great fruitfulness of life. As you walk a spiritual path, it gets better. And then you think, you know what, I'm going to come back to this strange, bizarre, twisted, hideous beauty one more time, because now with my instinct for wisdom, I think I can really engage with it. So nature increasingly becomes part of such a person's life.
Yes, I agree with you. And you say it takes decades perhaps for someone who is beckoning nature to speak to them in that way. Am I hearing you correctly when you're saying that? In terms
Yeah,
of cultivating that communion on that level and getting that level of intelligence through something that seems inanimate.
yeah, I would put forth that in my system of the supernal path, supernal path. I beg your pardon, supernal path.
Yeah.
That those four. That's where I was swapping the th for the f there. I was thinking ahead of myself. There are four levels of initiation which we won't go into, but it's 40 years work. So each stage of initiation, from the first level initiate to the fourth level initiate, it's a decade. It's a decade of work. If you have proximity and fellowship of other adepts, if you don't, you'll never do it. So the beauty of initiation is it's a pathway to higher wisdom. You can't do it on your own. You
Oh,
won't be able to you won't be able to decode what nature's saying on your own. It's
okay,
not possible.
really? Okay. That's interesting because you know what figures come to mind immediately. And I, as a young
Hmm.
adult, was a huge fan, still am, of Ralph Waldo Emerson, being neighbors to where he grew up here in Lexington, Massachusetts. Ralph Waldo Emerson as well as Thoreau, and their love of solitude, not the least of which was in Walden Pond in Concord. And I think to myself, as a private person myself, and you use a very strong term when you say initiation, but I have to say that I'm of the ilk, and perhaps mine is on a much more surface level, that epiphany comes in that moment of silence and aloneness as well.
It
Yeah,
most of your work comes in solitude, but there's two things you can do. You can have solitude, and you can have fellowship. And
sure.
if they're not in their proper proportion in life, then you tend toward fiction. If you're in one camp or the other too much, there must be a proper proportion. I would say it probably looks like 2/3 of the time in solitude and a third of the time in fellowship. That's probably about the right balance for a spiritual person. I can definitely attest and agree with what you were saying, that my testimony of epiphany always comes alone. I mean, I've had some amazing times with particularly my fabulous wise wife, who constantly amazes me with her insight and wisdom. So I've shared many things with her through the last decade which have been priceless. And some good friends, one or two good men, one or two good women as well. Still, though, the majority of things that my revelation of life come alone.
But again, in looking for that equilibrium, Neil Kramer, I don't think one could come without the other. They reciprocate.
Sun
It's
and the
sort of,
moon.
yeah, the sun, that's just the way it is. That's perennial, it seems to me.
The sun and the moon. So think of the sun as fellowship and think of the moon as solitude.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Makes perfect sense. It's like when I am fully immersed in a good book, and by the way, I don't read fiction. I can count on one hand fiction books that I've read, novels. But when I'm enfolded in a great body of spiritually oriented work, let's call that for the time being my outside of it, that's solitude, I suppose. But I'm bringing in another author, and I'm reading somebody else's words. I'm trying to see how I can marry this, and based on that which I resonate with in that book, in solitude, epiphany comes, and that book may have been the prompting for it. If that makes any sense. It's
Sure.
somewhat of a balance.
There's different degrees of solitude. From sitting alone with a cup of coffee and reading a book is a nice way to be alone.
Yeah. Well, when I say solitude, though, I'm sorry. When I say solitude, I mean with no other stimuli, nothing, including a book.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Yes. No music, no nothing.
I understand. The other end of the scale is, as I like to do too, which is to be in the wilderness alone with nothing except, me backpack, my rifle, and that's it. Nothing. Just those things, just me and the elements. Then I can start to feel true solitude, where there is no stories, no narratives, no fictions, no voices, nothing. Even the cell phone doesn't work gloriously. So yeah, and there's stages in between that. I can't run off and do that every 2 minutes because nothing would ever get done.
Right.
But for sure, to spend time alone is a very significant part of the spiritual unfoldment. For sure, it is. Without fellowship, though, of adepts, there is a slowing down of knowledge, and there is a tendency towards fiction. I have to stress that again, in my view. So I make sure that I have both in my life, in the proper proportions, once again.
1/3 in fellowship, 2/3 in solitude, roughly.
I would say so.
I think that's a good recipe, Neil Kramer. I think that's great. Oh boy, here we go again. There is a part 3 on the horizon. Look, you're just invited back whenever you want. You know that at this point, right? So we've still got a few minutes, but I'm thinking, there are so many points that we're not going to get to. But that'll just give me an excuse to have you back on.
Sure.
I want to take the rest of this precious time with you to segue into something that I'm going to call, you left folks with a heck of a cliffhanger in our last show. And for everyone that has not listened to our wonderful interview with Neil just a couple of weeks ago, I urge you to go back and do so, because he had a little something to say about our current president of the United States. And it was somewhat taken out of context, but I want it to somehow relate, as all things on some level do.
Yeah, nicely put, Alexis. I was thinking that, are we going to get to this or what? But
Absolutely.
I thought, you know what? This is part of what we're talking about. It's it's not as diverted away as one thinks, is it?
No. And in reflecting on how I was going to fold Mr. Trump into this conversation about shadow mapping, it started to make more and more sense. So I'm going to let you have at it, Neil Kramer, and tell us. Again, I'm going to urge people to go back. Perhaps you can just reiterate what you said, that you think he's a pretty cool dude and for what reason, but please give people the full essence of where this is coming from. You're on. Go for it.
I will.
Let's do it.
When you know what empire is, when you know what polarity is, when you know what alchemy is, when you understand the principle of destruction being central to goodness, Donald Trump is the best thing that's happened to America since Thomas Jefferson, which is today, as we record this, his birthday, as a matter of fact, Mr. Jefferson. So let me present to you 3 keys to understanding Donald Trump. Number 1, Trump is a heyoka. In Native American Indian spiritual culture, the heyoka is a spiritual joker. Heyoka is spelled Heyyoka. Heyyoka. Heyoka. A sort of sacred teacher, a rather contentious figure who behaves in a very peculiar sort of way. And in their strange behavior, they expose misconceptions in society at large. So the Heyoka shows falsehoods that have gone unaddressed in wider society for a long time, assumptions about right and wrong, about good and bad, quality and rubbish. And you find certainly the character of the Heyoka in many Indian tribes going back a little bit, but mostly among the Lakota people of the old plains of America, which today you'd say is Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, around there. And then in time, these tribal traditions of the Heyoka spread to other areas like Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and so on. So the Heyoka is also sometimes called a contrarian warrior, the contrary warrior or the contrarian warrior, a person who engages in a very peculiar sort of satire, and they lampoon the nuances and sensibilities of the age. They oppose the established order as a way to ask people to look again at what they think they know. And as I've said many times, the Heyoka himself may often be relatively or even entirely unconscious of this process of wisdom. They don't know of the wisdom that they channel. They cannot appreciate the higher purpose they are serving. They don't know. And that's not uncommon. But the Great Spirit places these figures into society to change it for the better. And if you realize that the contrarian warrior, does things that appear the opposite of the usual way, you begin to, at that point, comprehend the method, the wisdom here. So let me say it like this. This very obstinate, contrarian, defiant warrior serves to hold up a mirror to our own untruth.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
They reveal the shadow inside that we have sought to turn away from. They show us, by questioning our routines and habits and ideologies, that we haven't been telling ourselves the truth. And if the shadow that we have been burying has been, sort of hidden away under this fanciful dream of utopia and rainbows, and that somehow we're already in a very realized, soft and gentle loveliness of humanity. If you've been doing that, then the contrarian warrior brings pain with that truth, that is not true. He brings pain by overturning that untruth. So the Heyoka, the contrarian warrior, is consequently very often mocked and hated and scorned. So in our fascinatingly hideous and stunningly beautiful world, Donald Trump is our Heyoka of this time, the great white Heyoka of the world. He brings light to the things we don't want to look at. So that's the first key to Donald Trump, right? Mm-hmm. Key number one is a Heyoka. Key number two, Trump exposes empire. Before Trump, nobody in the mainstream knew that there were deep corruption elements in the FBI, NSA, CIA, Mossad, MI6. Not everyone knew that. They thought, wait a minute, those organizations are there to protect national security and international peace, surely. Ostensibly they are. There are some good men and women in those organizations that do that work, sure. But at very high levels, those organizations have been very, very deeply compromised. That is plain to see now. That's obvious if you're paying attention. If you're just watching Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper, you might not know what's going on because, that's just claptrap what they talk. But if you're actually reading between the lines and balancing mainstream, alternative, independent, traditional, new, balancing all those sources of information together with your own discernment, deduction, and intuition, you see also that the world leaders all around the world are full of crap and always have been. And the trade deals, the lies, the dirtiness, the abuse of the system, the human trafficking, the problems, the corruption. Facebook, seriously? It's so clear now. We've just been looking at Mr. Zuckerberg, and it's very clear, isn't it, that Zuckerberg is just this blank face of a CIA spy program called Facebook. It's nothing to do with a shared family photo album where we can share pictures of little Jimmy's 3rd birthday. It's a spy program. And that's very important. And not many people knew about all this stuff before Trump. So in the history of America, and perhaps in the history of Britain, I have never seen one figure bring so much light to the shadow of empire than Donald Trump. Never. So that's the second key.
Okay.
Let me tell you the third key, and then I'll hand back over to you. Because I know we've pushed for time. Key number 3, very easy. Trump is dismantling empire. One of the big problems with empire, and I'll say this plainly, is that human trafficking and human sacrifice is a massive deal. And it's the thing that must never be spoken of. You can talk about UFOs, you can talk about JFK assassination, you can talk about World War II if you insist, you can talk about this, you can talk about that, but you must never talk about human sacrifice. You must never talk about human trafficking. Those things are related. Trump knows about that stuff. He's been tipped off by sources who know what that is and know that that's a big problem, and that's at the heart of empire. So human trafficking, human sacrifice, pedophilia is at the heart of empire. It's founded the corruption on those things, and it touches so many governments, so many world leaders, so many institutions, you would not believe it. Then forget Me Too and Harvey Weinstein and all that. I mean, we're talking at a industrial scale here.
That's right.
Trump knows about it, and he's for the first time ever, he's taken extraordinary steps to dismantle that foundation stone of empire. No one else has ever touched it. Nobody. In fact, they've made it worse for the last 100 years. He's not. He's actually taken it to pieces. So all the fiction of Trump is a narcissistic. Well, he is narcissistic. That's not
very
fiction.
much so. Yeah. I want to comment on that.
The fiction is, I know, I can't say that. The fiction is that he's a racist, bigoted, xenophobic, blah, blah, blah. No, he isn't. No, he isn't. I know loads of people who know him, and they say he's not at all. And like I say, I am way more bigoted, xenophobic, sexist, racist, homophobic than he is. And I'm not any of those things, hardly at all. I am way more than that, and I'm a decent man. He is none of those things. That's the Anderson Cooper, Rachel Maddow fiction. Garbage. He knows there's a problem, and he's prepared to take on the hatred directed at the exposer, at the Heyoka, because he knows that in 50 years, 100 years, when we're all gone and he's disappeared, that his legacy will speak for itself. And only those with insight and discrimination powers to see what is true. Discrimination, extremely important human gift of beauty. If you can discriminate, you can see now what Trump is doing. If you're not being programmed by the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, BBC, if you look carefully at what's going on, you see those 3 things in play. Is a Heyoka, he's exposing empire, and he's dismantling empire. No one's touched it. And for those conspiracy and parapolitical people who say, oh no, it's ridiculous, believe you me, Donald Trump was not meant to get elected. That's the last thing.
You really believe that? Okay, that's an interesting.
That's the last thing empire want. And I absolutely guarantee this to you. If you ever want an example of how fallible and how weak empire truly is, Hillary was supposed to win, not Trump. I guarantee you that. And I have lots of inside sources, which I can't reveal, which have, to my satisfaction, corroborated that. They wanted Hillary because she was going to just carry it through for another 4 or 8 years. Trump, to them, is a total disaster. They can't kill him. All they can try and do is discredit him. So he is the enemy of empire. And he has to keep empire very close to him. So when he's got all these bankers and, terrible people and corrupt individuals and dark figures around, and you're thinking, well, what are you talking about? That's crazy. He's a chess player. He has other chess players with him, as you might say. And you have to keep your opponent very close to you. Very
that's
close
right.
to you.
We know the old adage. Yes,
it doesn't. That's right. So it doesn't always look like he's doing the right thing, but by and large, and he is narcissistic, he is a megalomaniac, he is crazy, he is uncouth, he does say silly things. He does all kinds of daft stuff that you roll your eyes at, or throw your arms into the air and wonder what on earth's happening. This has to come. The system has to come down. It has to be dismantled. And he is the only person ever that I've ever seen in all my life who has a actual vested interest day to day in doing it. And he is doing it.
Wow. I don't know if there's anything I can follow up on there. I'm just listening. Thank you for that. Thank you for illuminating that. Yes.
I invite people to look at that. And I know that if you've gone with the main narrative that Trump's a disaster and he's not all nice like Mr. Obama and all this, I realize it's quite a jump from what I'm saying to take a look seriously at that. But I invite you to go and carefully look at the backstory of what's happening with Trump. It's not in the newspapers and the websites.
Well, no, it can't be, because newspapers is empire, right? So we get that. I think
mainstream media is empire.
Absolutely.
You can't do that. So you have to go and be Sherlock Holmes, do your own detection work. It will take you about 6 months. You can't do it in an Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea. It takes a while. But when you start to piece it together, it's startlingly obvious what's happening. And it's actually a great optimistic thing. And it's the best thing I've ever seen happen to this country ever. Yeah.
Very interesting. I don't know who is out there listening, Neil, but I do have a feeling that we know that there are, certainly our channel does not necessarily focus on these clearly conspiratorial ideas, not just conspiratorial, but this type of discussion. And yet I think it is it's so important. I am following. I have some inkling as to some of the things that you're talking about and have too looked into it. As I mentioned off air, I have become apolitical. So in my looking at it, again, I always choose to delve into the esoteric significance. And with that, I want to bring up something else, because obviously he's an enigma. He's an enigma.
That's fair.
I mean, come on.
Absolutely right. Yes.
And in that, but for me, Alexis Brooks, looking at the significance of enigmas, not bad, not good, significant. I had some thoughts of Trump on the global stage at this time, and I've talked about this before. And perhaps you've given me another layer to look a little further into. There's a few things I may say to you offline on that point. But to me, and this still holds true, not of this or that, but of this and that, he represents the universal archetype of shadow. That would include ego, narcissism, and self-promotion. Those are the qualities that have been pushed by empire. Now, I'm not playing devil's advocate here. I'm kind of adding to another layer to his significance.
No, I can see that. I absolutely see that.
That has been pushed.
And I think he has to. This is the beautiful irony of it. You can only take empire down from within. He is a product of empire.
He is a product of empire. That's right.
And so it's like one of their own agents turns against them when he sees what's going on. And he has seen what's going on, and he can't bring that to the public attention, or he would be out. He'd be instantly impeached.
Right.
They'll have a go at it anyway, but I don't think they'll succeed.
Right.
So you have to see, as you said earlier, rather like yourself, I am honestly quite apolitical. I've never really considered myself as Democrat or socialist or conservative or Republican. Nothing of those sorts. I really don't see myself like that. If anything, I'd perhaps say I was a libertarian, in that government should be small and should not interfere with the business of good people. That's it. Period. Done.
Right.
But I wouldn't say Rand Paul represented me too well in that respect, although I know he's a decent man, the Kentucky fella, but whatever.
Right.
I'm not political in this, so I still urge people, though, whatever you think about the narratives on Trump, treat him as an example of embodied shadow on the world stage every day.
Absolutely.
We've never seen that before.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he speaks just off the cuff, and because he says stupid things, that's all the more interesting.
Right. Well, here's the point. If I can just close on this archetypal significance. the shadow that he represents in those aspects of ego and narcissism have been pushed by empire onto the masses to replicate. This is an aspect of the macro shadow that exists to some extent within most of us at some level. So to me, the significance of this big ego shadow coming to the fore is allowing us, for those who choose, to map that in ourselves in order to get rid of it.
Very wise words, Miss Brooks. Very, very wise words indeed. I think you bang on with that. If you hate Trump, there's something you hate in yourself. And that hatred is legitimate, and it makes you look at it. It doesn't mean you're wrong, but it says, what is it? What is it about that? And my feeling is that Trump kills the fiction. He kills the fiction that we have this lovely world politics and we're in a kind of nice democracy with just one or two problems. That's garbage. That's garbage. The world is in a terrible, terrible state, and it's a real mess. And the people who are running the world don't have the interests of world society, of good men and women at heart. They don't. And he's the only person who's calling that out. And it's staggering. It's very, very fascinating. And the mystical observer cannot afford to be partisan on this. They cannot afford to bias one way or the other.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
You must simply look at the truth of it. And the truth of it is, he is a Heyoka. Look carefully at that. Go and read the crap Wikipedia entry. Wikipedia is awful, by the way, but it's not a bad place to begin. It's like a launch platform.
Try going to the library. Remember we talked about that?
Libraries? What are they? I've never heard of such a thing. Number two, Trump, he does expose empire. He does. And number three, he is dismantling it. He totally is. So if you just examine those 3 points as clearly as you can, with no preconceptions, you see that whatever your political persuasion, if you can suspend that for a moment, something very fascinating is happening that's showing us about the world social shadow. We're absolutely seeing it, represented every day. It couldn't be more illustrative of how we can see what is inside ourselves play on the outside. So as we often say in my work, the disavowed shadow inside will become inevitable drama on the outside.
I say brilliant. And let me just add, a thought came to my mind, Neil. In order to get the closest look, as close as you can, you have to zoom out as far as you can.
Nicely put. Love it.
So if we can manage to do that, if any of us can manage to do that, we may just start to see some of what you're talking about. Oh boy, we're over. And I'm really bummed about that because, as you know, we could go on for much longer, but we're going to have to
no
cut
problem.
it there.
We'll speak again soon.
We are going to speak again. Will you come back again, Mr. Neil Kramer, soon?
I would love to. Thank you.
I think next time we may have to get you on camera so we can see
the
great expressions that go along with your wise words. Really, seriously. So we'll talk about that.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Any closing thoughts? And by the way, we are, again, I'm going to urge everyone to go back and listen to part 1. So you can get the full scope of what we've been chatting about here. We did mention transmutation, but I want you to mention again real quick for us. I went to the transmutation website. This is a documentary, feature-length documentary film that's coming out soon, we hope, that looks beautiful, by the way. Tell us about that real quick.
Transmutationfilm.com. Go and check it out. It's a documentary we've worked on for a long time. It's done. It's finished. It's out for early previews to different magazines and organizations who are taking a look, and there's one or two reviews out which I'll post on my Facebook and website and whatnot. Transmutation is a film about real spiritual life, about real mystical human beings changing themselves for the better. It's about uprooting normality, and it's really a very contemplative piece about human transformation, about the natural world's role in that, and about sharing some sort of time with a bunch of individuals on that screen, including myself, who I guide you through the whole thing, really through the film, but encountering real people who have taken the risk to redefine themselves, not in a way that you will see in a normal spiritual flick. This is different. Very, very beautifully shot as well by the extremely talented
I can see
extremely
that.
talented Niles Heckman, who is
Fantastic.
a great force in independent filmmaking, and I'm sure we'll just go from strength to strength. It's very, very beautiful. Watch the trailer. That's not just the best bits. That's typical of all of the whole thing. So
Yeah.
go and look at the trailer. It'll probably be out in the coming months,
I hope
we
so.
expect.
I'm
It's ready to
excited.
go. We've done our bit. It's just the business side of it now or whatever, but it's very exciting. Transmutationfilm.com. Go to neilkramer.com, Kramer with a K, and look at all the exciting, interesting things on there: books, essays, downloads,
Yeah.
Romecasts, all kinds of fun things. neilkramer.com, please do. Thank you.
All right. Well, you know the drill, folks. We will have all of the relevant links on higherjourneys.com. And maybe we can even put the trailer directly on there. It is beautiful, beautifully shot and beautifully done. Can't wait to see it. All right, Mr. Neil Kramer, again, words of wisdom. You never have a shortage of those. And I do thank you for sharing them with our audience today. So I'm going to ask you to stay online, and I'm going to say happy weekend. Well, actually, this is going to be next Wednesday, but still, happy weekend to the Higher Journeys audience. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you real soon. Take care. Empire's long-held playbook of programming through trauma and then setting up a framework by which to avoid it at all costs has and remains one of the biggest challenges to mankind, whether we are conscious of it or not. And yet, if one can muster the strength and wisdom to meet that trauma head on, not only will the pain dissolve, but the real path to spirituality can be achieved. As hard as these lessons may be to process, this is what Neil means when he says that shadow mapping is the appreciation that truth brings pain. I appreciate Neil's candor and his distillation of such ideas and ideals. And as always, I appreciate you for tuning in to this most thought-provoking episode of Higher Journeys. Until next time, I'm your host, Alexis Brooks.